My name is Monk Rowe. We're interviewing today for the Hamilton College Jazz Archive, and it's a pleasure to host Bobby Gordon, clarinetist.
Thank you.
Welcome to Chautauqua.
Thank you very much.
Had a long flight from San Diego. How long have you been in San Diego?
I've been living in San Diego now for about the last 17 years,
Yeah.
and from New York City originally, and Long Island, Manhasset, Long Island, and by way of New York City, and then I've been out in San Diego now for about 17 years.
Yeah. What's the West Coast jazz scene like in San Diego? Do you have to travel to play?
Well, there's a lot of festivals in California. There's a festival every week if you really wanted to work at it hard. All the way from San Diego, I would say up to Seattle and Washington, Portland, Oregon, all the way down the coast, Utah, Nevada. You could work every weekend. You could play every weekend at a jazz festival if you wanted to, 52 weeks a year.
Do you want to?
Well, it depends on the type they are and the type of the bands that they have and things like that. But usually what I do is I travel, make San Diego my base, and I travel out of town. It's just sort of this type of a thing and things like that.
In the book we were just talking about, the recent jazz recording book, it describes you as a Dixieland swing clarinetist. Is that a fair?
I would say that's what I would say. That was very nice of them to say that.
Yeah.
I'm proud of that, being a Dixieland swing clarinet player.
How has Dixieland? This could be a hard question, but we'll try it. How has Dixieland music changed from, I don't know, its New Orleans heritage?
Well, it's changed quite a bit. In the old days, I guess in New Orleans in the 1920s, even before that, they called it Dixieland jazz, and they had mostly blacks playing that type of music. And now, in the 90s now, they have a whole different type of combinations of Dixieland bands. The name Dixieland is really a bad term because it puts a label on the type of music that actually was played. Actually, it's called classic jazz or traditional jazz. That's what I like to call it. And back in the 20s, when they had Johnny Dodds and Louis Armstrong and Jimmy Noon, Nancy Cara, Lily Del Christian, Earl Hines, all these different stars of jazz in the 20s were the black artists. And they all sold millions of records. Louis Armstrong sold 1 million records in 1926 of his Hot 5 and Hot 7 records. And through the years, it has evolved in Chicago, in New York, where more white musicians were getting into it now, then. And, I'm speaking of people like Bix Beiderbecke, Bud Freeman, Pee Wee Russell, Eddie Condon. There's a whole slew of them, which were called the Chicago-style jazz. And these fellows were mostly white guys that heard Louis Armstrong and Johnny Dodds and all these people on riverboats as they traveled up the Mississippi River. And then from there, Eddie Condon, as I was saying before, Eddie Condon, Pee Wee Russell, and Bud Freeman, etc., they moved east to New York, and in doing so, they brought in another flux of musicians where the blacks started to come back in jazz, very, very much so, like Fats Waller and James P. Johnson and Art Tatum or anybody like that would come in. And then in the 60s, all these fellas that were playing that jazz in New Orleans and playing the jazz in Chicago were all dying off. So in the middle 60s, there were some people that decided to keep the jazz going. Now, some of the people that are keeping it going are here today. I mean, at this jazz festival, and one of the major outlets of the older white jazz coming into the younger style of white jazz or black jazz or whatever you want to call it is Marty Gross, who was a one of our contemporaries, and I've known him when I was living in Chicago. And there was a few fellows like him, Marty Gross, Frank Chase, Frank Orchard, Tut Soper, there was Little Brother Montgomery, there was Bob Skyver, there was a whole bunch of different guys that started the revivalist guys that started bringing that Chicago style back and the New Orleans style back. And now, just as they were moved into the 80s, they were getting a little bit older, like myself and Marty Gross and guys like that. And then there was another influx of musicians that came around again, which was on the younger side. Now, the people that are playing jazz today, in their 20s and 30s, are keeping keeping the flame, so to speak, of keeping it alive throughout the 20s, 30s, 20s through the 80s. And a lot of those guys are here today at this festival also.
It's great to see the young guys doing what, I guess, what would we call, I don't know, sometimes you don't want to put a label on everything, but what we'll hear tonight at this festival, do you have a name for the style?
No, it's a whole mixture of different styles. You'll hear Dave McKenna on piano solos, whose style is, you wouldn't call him a Dixieland piano player or a traditional piano player. And you have Becky Kilgore, and she's a great singer, and she wouldn't call her traditional or anything like that. She takes more after the Ella Fitzgerald or Lee Wiley's type of singing. And some of the bands will not be really Dixieland bands. They'll be sort of like classic jazz bands.
Do you, when we look at the players that are playing this kind of music today, there seems to be rare to see a black musician, young black musician, playing this kind of music. Do you have any thought on that?
Well, there is. If you go down to New Orleans now, there's a few of them that are coming back and playing this type of music. Wallace Davenport and Wendell Brunius. And a few others. I would say Wynton Marsalis and his brother are taking up the young blacks, are coming back again with jazz more in the forefront.
Right. Well, that was actually a great answer. I'm glad I asked the question. Sounds like you know your history. Was clarinet your first instrument?
Yes.
And how did you get your start in the world of music?
Well, when I was in 11 or 12 years old, I had a very close friend of my family. His name was Joe Marsala, who was a clarinetist in his own right. He had his own band on 52nd Street, played with Willie Minone, played with Louis Prima, played with all the Bobby Hackett, Eddie Condon, played with all the great bands, and he kind of took me under his wing and started giving me clarinet lessons when I asked to have them. And it was a good experience because I would go out on location to jobs with him when he could go and play in New York City. He'd take me on the train and we ride in, and I got the chance to meet Pee Wee Russell, and I got a chance to meet Eddie Condon and George Wetley and Muggsy Spanier and all these people.
That's pretty fascinating for a young man to...
Yeah, well, I was about 12 or 13 years old at the time, and it was really something else, really something to see.
Was that the heyday of 52nd Street?
No, the 52nd was a little bit before that, but this was after 52nd Street.
And how long did you stay in New York?
Oh, I stayed in New York till up to the time I was around 38 or 39, and then I moved up to the coast.
Yeah. When did you think that you were going to be a musician?
Well, as soon as my dad used to take me down, I'm from Hartford, Connecticut originally, and my dad used to take me down to the State Theater, which was an old dance place, and they showed movies, and they had dance bands there. And I saw Joe Marsala play, and that brought my interest into music. I was about 4 or 5 years old at the time, and I used to listen to records, and my dad was in the record business in Hartford in New York, and also in the publishing business. So it was kind of instilled in me and my family that to like me, to take up music.
So your association with Joe was directly responsible for you picking up the clarinet?
Yes.
And did you get instruction in public school?
Yes, I did, in public school, and then I went for a couple of years to college, and then learned a little bit about harmony and theory and things like that.
What was your experience in public schools as far as your clarinet playing?
Well, when I started before I was in high school. I started when I was around 11 or 12 years old, and then we had the usual band and orchestra as you had to have in high school, and then we had little groups that would come out of that. Different guys wanted to get into jazz and things like that back at that time, and so did I, and my friends that I'd known through school. We formed little groups and played for dances and little parties and things like that, and then we had the regular band and orchestra, and I didn't take any instruction in high school. Mostly I was through Joe Marsala, who taught me a great knowledge of chords and a great knowledge of trying to improvise on certain chord progressions. So that's really where I got my basic start from Joe Marsala.
When you were playing for these school dances and so forth, what year was that? What years?
Well, these were 1957, 1958, 56, around there.
So the popular music of that time, they were leaning towards rock and roll.
Well, that's when Elvis Presley came out around that time, and he kind of changed everything for musicians and jazz musicians especially, because everybody started to like rock and roll then, and that type of music, our type of music, went in the background, and it still hasn't come back yet, but it's starting to come through a little bit now, I think.
So what kind of music would you play for high school dances?
Well, around that time there was a movie that came out called The Benny Goodman Story with Steve Allen and Donna Reed. And we used to play the Benny Goodman tunes, you know, and things like that. And we played at a theater for the original opening of the movie in Manhasset, Long Island. Just a trio, piano, drums, and clarinet. And then we still play the old style jazz, but we wouldn't play any rock and roll. We were kind of against that. We were rebelling against it.
You were taking a stand. That's interesting. Well, I'm interested in how Joe taught you chords and so forth. Did he play a keyboard instrument, or did he just
talk to me about it on the clarinet and talk to me and played the clarinet and showed me certain things and told me. I memorized a lot of the stuff that he told me, and later on it came out. When I went to the University of California in San Diego, and I knew exactly what they were talking about when I was studying music, because I had that instilled in me in an earlier age about chord progressions and scales and writing and things like that. I knew how to do that way before I was in high school and way before when I was in college. So because just by listening to records and listening to Louis Armstrong and listening to Eddie Condon, certain guys, P.B. Russell, Joe Marsala, I used to listen to records constantly, and then also got a chance, like I said, to go on the train into New York City and meet these great jazz musicians with Joe. Jack Teagard, I could just name them just like that. They're all off the bat. They were great. And they were always very nice to me, and I looked up to them. And I always said I always wanted to be a jazz musician like these guys, because I thought they were very successful, you know. And I said, well, this is what I want to do, you know.
Would you do it all over again?
Yes, I think I would. Yes.
I'm glad to hear that. It is a kind of looks like a glamorous thing to do at the time. Plus,
at the time, you say, where do these guys look so sharp, you know, and where do they get all this money, you know?
Yeah. Did you ever have to work non-musical jobs?
Yeah, a few times I did, yes.
Yeah. I think most musicians end up doing some of that. They may not talk about it an awful lot. When was the first, do you have a gig or a series of gigs with a certain person that you felt was really your entrance into, let's say, the big time, or really doing what you wanted to?
Well, what I'm doing now is what I really enjoy. I've never enjoyed anything so much, because I'm getting the chance to play with some musicians that are great New York musicians, and as I say again, a lot of them are here today. Scott Robinson, Marty Gross, Keith Ingham, Hal Smith. Just in the last 10 or 15 years, I've been getting into that type of music and being lucky enough to be able to make a lot of recordings with Marty and doing a lot of appearances. I've been to Japan twice. I'd say this is the most musical feeling I've had, the best musical experience I've had for a long time. But years ago, I used to play with Muggsy Spanier, and I played with Eddie Condon and Bobby Hackett and Jimmy McPartland. That was just a little stint, little weeks here, 8 weeks here, maybe 16 weeks there, 3 weeks there. And but now that I'm doing a lot of recordings with Marty, and we have a little group called the Orphan Newsboys, I'm really at my happiest, experiences right now.
Wow. Tell me a little bit about your experience with Eddie Condon.
Well, I didn't know him very well, but he's a very close friend of my father's, Eddie was. And I knew Eddie later on in life, just before he passed away. And I just started to work with him just before his death. I was working, maybe a year or two before, I was working with him in New York City. And I even asked him, I said, Eddie, I have a job. Would you like to come out and play? And I called him up, and he said, sure, he would. And we were all on cloud nine because Eddie Condon's going to come out and play with us, But I didn't know him that well, but I appeared with him a couple of times, many times. I didn't know him that well.
And didn't you go on to play in Condon's?
I did Eddie Condon's club in 1978. I was the house clarinet player there for 3 years.
Yeah. Now, what does it mean? Perhaps we'll have some people watching this that may not know what it means to be a house clarinetist.
Well, a house clarinet player is the regular clarinet player that's there every night, in and out, and no matter who's there. You have to be there 6 nights a week, and you play from 9 till 2 in the morning, or 8:30 to 1:30, or whatever it is. But I was there for 3 years. The house clarinet player means, just what it is. You're the clarinet player for the club. You're hired to do that. And then that's quite a long time to be in one place for 3 years at Eddie Condon's. That's quite a long time.
Right. When you make recordings these days, how long do you usually get in the studio to do a record?
Well, it takes us about two or three days maybe to make one record. Sometimes you can make one in 1 day. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 days. A lot of musicians shuffling back and forth, and you have to wait for them. Some of them are busy on the one day. They have to come in the next day. But all in all, it's quite especially with making CDs, it's quite a lot of work to do that because it takes about 2 or 3 days. On the Marty Gross albums that I've made, we usually take about 2 days on those.
Yeah, because you can fit a lot of music on CDs as opposed to records used to get about 20 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah. You have also recorded with a whole number of people, including Leon Redbone. What was that like? Well,
first time I met Leon Redbone was in Eddie Condon's. I was playing there, and he was looking for a clarinet player. And he sent in a fellow named Tom Waits, who probably you're familiar with. So he was at the bar, and I was playing the clarinet, and I knew he was coming in. I knew somebody was coming in to hear me play, so I said, Mr. Waits, how do you do? And he said, I'm with Leon Redbone's entourage. So he had a couple of guys there. Leon wasn't there, and Leon said they had hired me. We were supposed to go to Cleveland, and I got a good word from Tom Waits, and everybody else was there. So the next day, I left for Cleveland, Ohio, and I went in the backstage dressing room, and Leon was fooling around with the guitar, and I was fooling around with the clarinet. And he said, let's do it. So we went out, and I spent association with him for 17 years.
I love that. Let's do it. You're just going out on stage, had no rehearsal.
No rehearsal or anything. But I spent the next 17 years with him and recorded about 5 or 6 albums with him.
He's got such a unique... what's he like as a person?
He's a very nice person, and he's very nice to me. And we appeared on The Tonight Show and The Johnny Carson Show 4 times in 1 year. And He always was nice to me, and that's the reason I moved out to California, because I left New York. Leon and I were in a, I don't know if I should say, a plane crash together. We were in Allegheny Airlines going from Morgantown, West Virginia. We were playing at the University of West Virginia, and we were in a plane crash that crashed right after takeoff. And he was hurt, and I was hurt, and the best thing, we were in the hospital for about 6 weeks. And the best thing that we survived it, there were a lot of people killed, and the best thing for me to do, the doctor said, would go out to California. So I went out there, and I've been out there ever since.
Wow, you were just talking about how hot it is out there now.
It is, it's very hot.
That's interesting, and I was also looking at you had quite an association with Rick Fay.
Rick Fay, I didn't get a chance to meet him till the last 10 or 15 years. I didn't know him before, but I've got a chance to record with him, and he responsible for getting me on some records and things like that. Great tenor player and soprano and clarinetist.
Yeah. Where do you feel you fit in the sound of your fellow clarinetists? Do you emulate anybody? Were you highly influenced by anybody besides Joe Marsala, or?
I was highly influenced by P.B. Russell quite a bit. I always enjoyed his playing, and the type of playing that I really like to do myself is I used to work with Joe Marsala's wife, Adele Gerard. She was a great jazz harpist. She was the first swing harpist to come along in the 1900s. Casper Reardon and a couple of others came along, but I used to like to just play with her and Joe and play together 2 clarinets and jazz harp, which is very nice. It's a very pretty sound, and that was probably some of the most fun I've ever had playing. Well,
speaking of that, I want to play Name That Tune with you.
Sure.
Does this tune sound, at least it goes, da 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 dum, ba da da dum. You know that tune, right?
Yeah, I think I know it. You mean Don't Let It End?
Yeah. I sang it pretty badly, didn't I? Actually, I have a thing I wanted to listen to here.
You can hear the harp on there.
Yeah. It must have been a pleasure to make this record.
It was, because it's not something I always wanted to do. Never had a chance to, and Adele said she'd come out of retirement to do it, so we had a great band in Los Angeles when we did this record. And it got a lot of awards, too, a lot of awards.
Got a great write-up on it, and I like the sound of the harp and the piano in there.
Yes, the mixture is beautiful, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, nice. What's your playing schedule like these days? Do you work as much as you want? Do you turn down work?
No, I work as much as I want. I live in San Diego, kind of a sleepy little town, and I have a job. I play there every Thursday through Sunday in a little club out there in La Jolla. And then I do my traveling and do my recording, and I'm pretty well happy. And I've been married now for about 11 years, so I'm pretty well happy now.
Great, good for you. Have you ever been in a musical situation where you said, this is not for me?
Oh, yes. When you play with some, what I call banjo bands or something like that, maybe where there's 15 banjos all playing at once, and a tuba player and a loud drummer, and wearing straw hats and vests and arm garters. That's the kind of thing I don't go for too much.
It's interesting you bring that up, because we saw that at one of the LA festivals we went to. And it made me wonder about what had been happening with the Dixieland music, and if...
Well, that's about what's happened to it.
That's what's happened to it.
Yeah.
It's become more of a show.
Yes.
Yeah. 15 banjos, eh?
15 banjos, a tuba, and drums. I think, and all of them playing out of meter and a lot of them out of tune. I don't enjoy those. I don't take many of those jobs, though, if I can help it.
Well, here's a hard question. When you're improvising, can you describe to me what's going on in your head?
Well, if you're playing a tune, sort of say like Rosetta or something like that, written by Earl Hines and Walter Fuller, I play the melody. If I'm playing by myself, I play the melody, the first chorus. I try to remember the melody. I try to play the melody most of the time on the first chorus. And then I would change into a jazz chorus, and I would think ahead of time in my head what chord progressions are coming up next. I would listen. I know F is coming here, and D7th is coming there, and G7th is coming there. I have that all stored in my head, I hope, and and I improvise on those chord changes on the song. That's how I do it.
Do you think that there are Bobby Gordon licks?
Not that I wouldn't say there are any Bobby Gordon licks, no. Okay. Stolen licks from Pee Wee Russell and Joe Marsala, maybe, yeah.
And then you try to make them your own, right?
Yeah, right, then they're mine.
I think everybody has to steal from somewhere. Oh, and where do you go from here?
Back to San Diego.
Back home?
Back to San Diego, and I start my weekend job, and then I'm playing with a group called Hal Smith's Roadrunners. And we're going to be in next month, a couple of weeks from now, 2 or 3 weeks from now, we're going to be in Sun Valley, Idaho, playing the jazz festival up there. And I'm looking forward to that. Then we go to Scottsdale, and then Palm Springs. I'm playing a date with the Palm Springs Symphony Orchestra. And then I'm playing, here and there, and then doing some more recordings. I've just had 3 recordings come out that I'm on, and I have more coming out, making more coming up.
That's great. What's it? How does that work with jazz recording these days? You know, downstairs they have a whole slew of CDs and many, many record labels.
Yeah.
Do they call you, or do you actively promote yourself to them?
No, actually, what they do is they call you. The record companies call you, or I. As a leader, and I've had 3 albums out as a leader of my own, and the record companies have called me, and I've hired the musicians to be on the record. And that's how it usually happens. If I'm making a record with Marty Gross, for instance, he would call me, and then I would come to New York if I was there at a certain time, and I would make the records with him. It's just it's not anything where you're under contract with anybody or anything like that. It's just making the records for somebody, and we try to sell them to whoever we can.
Yeah. Do you ever hear about how many actual recordings are sold?
No, I never heard of
that.
No,
kind of information.
we don't get that kind of information.
Yeah.
Most of them are mail order. Most of them are mail order albums.
Right.
But what we do get, we get reviews and press clippings from the different newspapers and magazines. They always send us those things. But as far as the recordings go, in this type of jazz, they're not exactly million sellers, you know, like they have today. It would take a long time to ever get, maybe say sell 100,000 records, 50,000 records. It'd take a long time, and the kind of jazz that we're playing today.
Yeah. It seems like there's a small but enthusiastic core of jazz fans.
That's what, especially the type that come here to Chautauqua, and you'll see them in the audience tonight. And when there's an intermission, they'll be out buying all the CDs because they're the type of people that are just the only ones left anymore for this type of music. Maybe there's some young people coming up, but that like it, but it's going to take a long time to train them.
To train them. See, now there's a key word, I think. How do you train a future audience?
Well, I think that today's music from the 30s and the 20s is coming back stronger and stronger. Now, I'm not saying the big bands. I don't think the big bands will ever come back. But I think the small groups like Fats Waller and his Rhythm, and I'm surprised that some black guys don't form these type of bands like Fats Waller had in the 30s. Maybe they don't think it's right or something like that. But I know from experiences where I play, if we play something like The Image of You or an old Willie Manone tune, and someone does a vocal on it, we get a very good response from the audience, which is a mostly younger audience. They've never heard these type of songs before. They're listening to the lyrics again, and the lyrics are, I think, what knocks them out. I think that's what they like, because it makes them think, well, gee, what have I been missing, you know? And I think that's the direction of jazz now.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. The lyrics and the chord progressions in those days, well, I suppose we can sound dated, but there seemed to be more of a craft to the songwriting.
Yes, they're not just one chord, like they had one or two chords, and like they have today. These tunes were, you know, with Gershwin and Irving Berlin and these guys. They wrote some pretty songs with nice chord changes, and I think it's a little harmonic, little melodies to them that please the younger generation's ear. I think that's what it is.
What's it like performing overseas?
Well, I've been to Japan twice with the Orphan Newsboys, and that is really an experience. If I had I'd love to go to Japan, because they just adore American music over there. So anything American that has to do with jazz, you know, you're already set up as being a hero, and that's the way we that's the way we're thought of over there, and it's a very nice feeling. And the younger generation over there really is into that type of music too.
Is the cost of living as expensive as I've heard?
It is. It's very hard, very expensive to live over there. One bottle of beer was $10.
Wouldn't do too much of that.
Yeah.
Tell me about what inspired you to do an album about music of Bing Crosby.
Well, when I lived in Chicago, we used to have a little record club, fellas that I knew, that we'd get together at this guy's house, and we listened to the old Louis Armstrong records, the Hot Fives and the Hot Sevens and all the things he made with Louis Russell. But also we got interested in Bing Crosby's singing, because he had a very nice voice. And we used to like to listen to him in the early days when he was with John Scott Trotter's orchestra, making recordings for Decca, and before that, the other labels. And we enjoyed Bing's style of jazz. And we started listening to him, the old records, back in the 60s. And I've been listening to him in the 70s, 80s, and 90s now. I've built up quite a collection, and that's the reason we recorded this album, because we wanted to get young guys that were interested in playing Bing Crosby music or Bing Crosby songs. And I think, in my mind, for instance, I always had it in the back of my mind that Bing would be a great guy to record later on, maybe now, or do some of his stuff now in a jazz vein. It's kind of like a tribute to him.
Yeah. Great. You've mentioned the Hot Five and Hot Seven a couple times, and what was it about those particular recordings that really were such milestones in your eyes?
Well, the first place, they were called race records, I guess they were called. They all sold 1 million records. Each copy that came out on 78s, and Louis Armstrong was just a genius of a cornet player on those records. That was just a recording band. They never played out in a club or anything like that. All they did was get together to record. And I think Louis Armstrong really showed the whole world of, including today, everybody that's playing trumpet had an influence on Louis Armstrong had an influence on everybody. And especially at that time when he was 25 or 26 or 27 years old, he was just playing some marvelous stuff on there, I thought.
Yeah.
Along with his contemporaries, Johnny Dodds and Kid Ory and the other ones that were on the records with him.
The sound of the instruments that come off those old 78s is interesting. You know, the technology at the time kind of flavored what everything sounded like.
Well, they used to record in Hammond, Indiana, I think, and they had it for Jeanette Records. back in the 20s. And there was a train that would go by every day, 2 or 3 times a day, so they had to stop recording when the train went by. They were in a little barn, and everything shut down while the train went by, and then they get back in and start recording again.
Oh, wow. I see you have worked with Keith Ingham.
Yes,
Am I
Keith.
pronouncing that right?
That's right.
Okay. He's done some arranging for you also?
Yes, he did the Bing Crosby album, the arrangements on that, and then Hal Smith, myself, and Keith have made some trio albums together.
That takes a lot of piano playing to do the trio thing, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It takes a lot out of everybody to do that.
But Benny Goodman kind of...
He sure could do it very nicely, yes.
He did all right with it.
Yes.
If you had a... Oh, this is probably... Can't answer this question, but if you had a dream band that you could work with for a couple months and go around the country,
yeah.
Do you have specific guys you would pick out?
Yeah, I would have, if they were still alive, I mean, I would have some of the guys that are passed away now. But,
who would they be?
Well, I'd probably have Bobby Hackett or Jack Teagarden and Eddie Condon and Jess Stacy, George Wetling, Walter Page on bass maybe, and I'd have P.B. Russell and Joe Marsala as my alternate clarinet players, so whenever I couldn't make it.
That would be something to send them in as subs for you, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's...
Wow. Well, that's great. Anything else you'd like to add that I haven't
No, I don't think so.
thought about here?
I don't think so.
I'll be interested to hear you play tonight. Have you ever been in a situation in these festivals where you don't know a tune?
Oh, yeah, on some of them I have.
Yeah.
I've been at really slick festivals where they're playing some bebop, and I'm not too familiar with that type of music. And I've tried to play it, but I know the chord progressions, but maybe the melody I didn't know.
Yeah.
But I've been in situations like that, yes.
Now, what will happen this evening as far as, I know you guys don't rehearse. Will there be a talk through? If you're playing in an ensemble?
No, there won't be a talk. They'll just, maybe just in the beginning, maybe Marty might say something that we're going to play this in this certain key, and I've got the first chorus, or you've got the second chorus. There's that, but usually it's just a free-for-all. Everybody just goes around and everybody plays what they want to play.
And there's a jazz etiquette, I suppose, to be learned.
Yes, there,
Right?
yes, there is.
I don't know if they teach that in schools.
I don't know about California, but when I was in New York, the clarinet always used to take the second or third chorus, but in California, the clarinet seems to take the first chorus all the time. And I got kind of instilled in that, so I usually wind up taking the first chorus.
That's interesting. Well, I want to thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
And we'll be listening this evening. And I hope your most recent recordings sell 1 million.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
It's about time for that, don't you think?
Yeah, I'd say.
All right.